Without further ado, Cowboys Nation, let's go ahead and welcome in our next guest this week, the one, the only, Bryan Broaddus, 105.3 The Fan, former Dallas Cowboys scout. Ladies and gentlemen, what's good, B?
He's in the building.
Hey, Sky, how's it going this morning? Nice to be with you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you blessing us with your time today. It's been a long time, too long that I haven't been able to talk some ball with you, man.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. I tell you what, man, it seems like that I have 5 or 6 jobs now.
Yeah.
You know, when you get that kid that goes to college, you got to find a way to pay for college. So it seems like I got a lot of time going a lot of different places, but always nice to make time for you.
You're one of the hardest working gentlemen in this industry, man, and you managed to do a fantastic job at all 16 of these jobs that you're doing, including being down there at training camp. First off, man, how is it being back out there with that beautiful weather, getting a chance to get away from this triple-digit heat?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been coming to Oxnard for a long time, and I could go all the way back to the days of when I was in the scouting department with the Cowboys, and we were in Wichita Falls in the early 2000s, and I remember being on the tower with Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones and Jerry Jr. and Larry Lacewell. And we were just, sitting there, and it was like one of those 108-degree days in Wichita Falls. And, we're all just standing there sweating. And, Jerry looks at us and goes, guys, this is madness. This is absolute madness what we're doing right now. And from that point on, I remember Jerry, he's really good friends with Al Davis. And the Raiders used to have their facility where the Cowboys currently are here at the River Ridge. They had a couple of fields. They had the hotel. They had all that they were using. I remember Jerry sent John Hickman, from our marketing department to come out here and look at the Oxnard facility. And it really was, that was the start. I mean, the Cowboys, growing up as a kid, always trained in Thousand Oaks, just to get away from the weather in Texas. And, it was always a successful camp. So the Cowboys had all those years. And then Jerry bought the team. You went to Austin for those early years, Wichita Falls, San Antonio. But, you end up at this place. I just couldn't imagine a better place to practice football. And just for the reason, Sky, of, when you look at camps around the country, and a lot of teams are using their indoor facilities, they're at their homes, and doing that. But when you're practicing in heat and humidity and all that, you're not concentrating on what you're doing. You're concentrating on how to survive practice. And out here, you don't have to do that. You just practice football. The weather is not going to bother you. But it allows you to get your work in. It really, really does. I know from that Wichita Falls time, we weren't a very good team. The Dave Campo teams, we weren't a good team. But, the way that Dave practiced, and the way that it was before collective bargaining, and the way he had two-a-days, pads, half pads, all that stuff, we just killed that team. And we get to the Philadelphia game, and they maul us. Andy Reid, I think it was when Andy Reid's first years in Philadelphia, not only game, they just mauled us. And so you have to think about your team. You have to think about how you practice. And this is just the best conditions that you can ever imagine to practice in.
It definitely feels like that. And you talked about being Wichita Falls, San Antonio. So we know you've been around the team for a long time. If you guys do not know, former scout Bryan, he was around there, Tony Romo era, and predates that as well. I got a question for you. You've been covering this team. You've scouted this team. Where would you stack this offseason in comparison to the last decade or so since you've been covering the squad?
Yeah, Sky, it was different in the way of how the offseason went about when it came to player acquisition. We're so accustomed to them drafting, them re-signing their own. And for Will McClay and Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, Mike McCarthy to figure out that, hey, here's an opportunity to go out and get a Stephon Gilmore, and there's an opportunity to go get a Brandon Cooks, and to use compensatory picks in that way of doing it, it was, and to get these teams that, were holding these players to come up with money to offset any money that you might have to spend.
Mm-hmm.
It was unique in that way, and it was. I think it's something that the Cowboys are looking at, going forward. How can we use picks, compensatory picks, in order to kind of supplement the roster? And the pick with Mozzie Smith is so different from what we've seen, say, under the Rod Marinelli administration, where we're not interested in the one technique or the nose, or that big inside body. We're, that completely, Dan Quinn and AD and those guys in the defensive staff last year, you saw what adding, Hankins did to this defense. And they also saw without Hankins what this defense, how it can look. And so those are the kinds of things that, Will, I think, is really, really, really good at. And, he's always going to protect his team. He's always going to try and bring in guys like if it's Adoga or Jones, he's always going to protect himself with a veteran guy and allow kind of as a bridge to maybe let younger guys have opportunities. And then, it's not a high-risk, money situation. So, they're always going to build their team, I feel like, in the right way. They're going to plug holes. They're going to try and find surplus. They're going to take, if they have a lot of guys, let's say surplus at a position, they're going to add another guy to that too. They're just going to keep adding guys. And, I do respect the way that Will does go about his business. I think the scouts, the pro scouts, they do a really nice job of understanding the league and then kind of being able to compete with what's in the division. This division got better.
Yeah.
The Commanders are better. The Giants are better. The Eagles, of course, the team you're really chasing is the division winners. But that's the most important thing to Will McClay is he's got to find a way to build a team that can win the division first. And then once he does that, then now you worry about the others, the San Franciscos and the others that are going to compete for this conference title coming this fall.
I think something else that seems to be different, B, is that they decided to go ahead and give Mike McCarthy the reins to this offense as opposed to Kellen Moore, where years past, you remember Jason Garrett, the reports were, you can maybe confirm this or not, Jason Garrett wanted to take over the play calling in 2019, and the reports were saying that he was denied that for Kellen Moore. Well, this year they said, go ahead, Mike McCarthy. We're giving you the reins now. What do you think went into that decision to move away from Kellen Moore, or mutually move away from Kellen Moore and give the reins to Mike McCarthy, something we haven't really seen much around here over the last decade or so?
Yeah, you used the word mutually, and I think you're absolutely right about that. I think that just my observation, I felt like that Green Bay game was the end of the road for Kellen Moore. I just felt like that when they went to Green Bay, Mike McCarthy put so much into that game. There were a lot of guys that had Green Bay ties. I just remember before the game, hey, Green Bay Packers, let's welcome back. And they had, like 6 guys up on the scoreboard, coaches and staff. And there was so much that went into that game. And the fact that they had a lead in that game and lost it the way that they did, Mike felt like, hey, that's on Kellen. But I really do believe Kellen was ready to leave as quickly as he had an opportunity after he was removed here, and to end up at the Chargers like he did. He probably closed his door in week 13 and started calling people about getting out of there. Week 14, week 15. Started calling people and thinking, okay, I've run my course here. I'm not gonna deal with this guy. I do think there was a philosophy difference between what Mike McCarthy wants to do and what Kellen Moore was doing. And I think that Mike was, I give him credit for this, he was smart enough to understand that, really that Dak was thriving in this. That, the offense was first in scoring 2 years ago, fourth in scoring last year. Let's not be stupid about it. This offense was, until the playoffs, was really humming along. And so, it kind of felt like that Mike was like, listen, I don't want to sit there and install a whole new offense, and I'll let Kellen do this. And, the Jones family convinced Mike that, hey, give Kellen a chance. And Mike did. And I think that we're to a situation now where Mike realizes that he's got to help his quarterback more. And I'm not just talking about the interceptions and stuff. You mentioned it before I came on. You talked about red zone yesterday. The 2-point plays yesterday they ran, the defense had no answer for the 2-point plays. Now, whether that's Brian Schottenheimer, whether it's Mike McCarthy, the creativity down on the goal line and the red zone and all that, these are things that you kind of felt like that, hey, Kellen Moore had a grasp of some of this, but Mike McCarthy seems to take it to a little bit of a different level. And so he realizes that he has to help. And I think the Jones family trusts Mike in a way to be able to say, hey, Mike probably went in there and said, what, I can do this better. I can do this aspect of our football team better, and that's where they're at right now. Now, the big question will be, and I've said this all really since before we camped, the concerns I have is there was such a high turnover on the offensive staff. Are things going to be, once they get into the season, is it going to be smooth? Are they going to come out? This team I don't think can be 3-3, with Mike McCarthy calling plays and, before somebody's asked questions like, okay, is this really the right direction? This offense needs to come out humming, like I talked about, and show that, by the time they get to that San Francisco game, that they're ready to go win that thing. That's, to me, one of those games I circled, a very important game, going to San Francisco on a Sunday night and finding a way to win that football game. You're going to create some doubt there if you go in there and do what you need to do. You're going to make this look differently. So I think that's what Mike wants to do. I think he wants to help the quarterback. I think he wants to help the offense. And the Jones family agree with him that he potentially can do all those things we just talked about.
Let's kind of get into some of the things you're seeing down there from an offensive standpoint. You talked about this yesterday about horizontal concepts and using every inch of the field. And I know Schottenheimer talked about that as well. And one of the things that I've always wanted to look at this training camp was not necessarily the individual players, because I think there's skill and talent there, but how are they being used? You're familiar with the West Coast, and just from afar, it seems like there's some more concepts there, some more sluggos, some more slants, some horizontal concepts. Is that what you're seeing down there?
Yeah, it really is. And when you watch, where you really can see is when they do what they call group install. And group install is the periods before they go to team, and they'll always work on what they're going to do in practice as a team in that pre-practice stuff. And what I've noticed is a lot more bunch formation, which is the 3 wide receivers together. They're planning on teams. We had Michael Gallup on 105.3 The Fan yesterday, and we were talking about that. And Zach Wolchuk asked him about the bunch formations and their ability to scatter from that. And, they feel like they're going to get a lot of man coverage. It's what's going on in the league now. So they're kind of finding ways to combat that. I've seen a lot of what they call the twins with the 2 wide receivers, and then what you have is you have like a pick and then a drive behind the pick. There's been a lot of crossing routes. There's been a lot of running routes at different layers, and it's really all on the move. In the past, we've seen Dak throwing to stationary or static targets or to an area. Here, there's far more crossing and running guys through trash, and you see that especially on the red zone yesterday. They were, guys, even the routes that, in a small area, a lot of movement, a lot of crossing routes, a lot, and Dak has done a pretty nice job, in these couple of practices where they've been in pads of throwing the ball and being accurate. I know there was people have put up the clips of the interception stuff. The one to Hooker, I don't know why he threw the ball the way he did, the one that Hooker got the other day. It seemed like to me he quit on the play and he just threw the ball, but we all know when Dak throws an interception, it makes national news.
Yes.
So, that's the thing that, but overall, it's just more of the movement, more of trying to create separation, more of trying to get guys to get them the ball on the move. And I think that's the best way that guys like Cooks and Lamb, those guys play really, really well on the move. And, that's what they're trying to do.
This is kind of a bit of a sidebar here. I'm watching some of these clips from the red zone area, and I noticed Ferguson being involved down there. With Schoonmaker being out, I'm very curious on your analysis on how the tight ends are looking down there, particularly Ferguson, because it seems like he's going to get the first call up.
Yeah, that we had this discussion. I forget what show it was. It might have been the break, but we were talking about, or it might have been dinner. I don't know. We were talking about Hendershot, and had you really noticed Hendershot all that much? And yesterday Hendershot had a couple of catches, some nice plays. He had to drop also though on what they call a spot route where he just curled up and Dak tried to kind of feed him the ball, and it hit off Hendershot. But Ferguson is the one that has been getting the primary look. I did see, I'm one of these guys that I'm buying the Schoonmaker hype, and I know there's a lot of people that are worried about that. I've talked to Will McClay about it. I've talked to a couple of guys in the scouting department. I'm trying to say, hey, listen, guys, I'm pulling for you here. I'm on the Schoonmaker train because I feel like that Michigan didn't really use him the right way. Michigan's offense is really a power running game, and he was a point of attack blocker, and he's really good at it. But there's times when you see him run routes, and they're pretty simple what he was doing at Michigan, pretty basic. But to me, the guy's got some underrated hands, and he's got really good size, and he moves well for how big he is. So, he was out there kind of doing some work yesterday. Hopefully they'll get him back here soon enough. I mean, that was one of those that when you initially asked at camp, or when camp opened, I said, hey, any timetable on Schoonmaker? And, I couldn't get anybody to say anything definitive. And that kind of was worried to me. I'm thinking, oh, please don't let this be a redshirt year. But this kid is really, really tough. He's really focused, and he'll help. I mean, they clearly, there's been some times in the 9-on-7 period where the tight ends have actually done a pretty darn good job. It's not one-on-ones. It's not the ones versus the ones. It's there's some twos and threes mixed in there with the ones. I mean, they kind of mix it up a little bit. But, the tight ends have done a pretty decent job of some of the point of attack blocking. Now, where they've really struggled is they can't block these edges. I mean, and again, I know one of them is Micah Parsons. I get it. Nobody's blocked Micah Parsons in this camp yet. It just hasn't happened. But they've tried. But the tight ends have really struggled when they've asked them to stay in those max protection situations and try and block these edges. They just don't have the sustain that that they probably are really comfortable. When you run max, you're trying to get the ball down the field, and when the max blockers are not getting it done, well, it makes the play look even worse. So there's been some really good catches, some really good routes, some good finish. There's been some good blocks at the point of attack, but there's also been some of the leakage in the passing game when they're asked to stay in.
Yeah, I think that's where Schoonmaker will come in, right? He could be like a quasi-6 offensive lineman because, the film shows that he was blocking defensive ends big in college and doing it pretty well.
No, that's him. That's Schoonmaker. And like you say, you watch Michigan run the football. They were one of the best, they had won the Tom Moore Award for the best college offensive line last year. And really what a lot of that had to do was with, Blake Corum, who's back running the ball at Michigan. I mean, he'll be a guy that we would talk about during the draft show. And, but they ran the ball behind Schoonmaker. It was a physical downhill attack. And, but I think there's more to his game than just the blocking aspect.
Yep.
I think there's some receiving ability there as well.
You talked about, was it Tom Moore, offensive line award?
The Tom Moore, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think any Tom Moore offensive line awards are going to be given to this offensive line at camp right now without Zack Martin. Because what I'm hearing right now is they're having a tough time blocking these guys up front with the absence of Big Zack. Now, I know that's going to play out behind the scenes. Hopefully it stays behind the scenes and not in front of the media too much. But what I want to know on the flip side of that, Bryan, is guys like Ball and Forniak and Bass, and these guys are going to get opportunities to showcase that they can hold up. Can you kind of give us your analysis on those guys that are, replacing Zack Martin at the moment? And if the Balls and Forniaks aren't doing it, is there someone behind them that is catching your eye?
Well, this is a mess right now, and I'm not going to lie to your listeners. It's a mess, and there's a lot going on here behind the scenes, and it's interesting to see the approach that Zack has taken, and it's interesting the approach that the Cowboys have taken. And, I didn't feel like, first off, let me say this. I don't think that Zack Martin wants to be sitting out of practices and being away from his teammates and potentially missing games and all that. But that's something that's now a reality. That is something that's a reality, and I didn't want to believe that. And I felt like that getting fined $50,000 a day was going to be something that he was, maybe a week of this, maybe a couple of days. I don't know. I was thinking that, we'll find a way to get to camp. But the Cowboys seemed very dug in on their position. And talking to people in the organization about it, they don't know what Zack's going to do. They don't have an idea. That they're not even going to play that guessing game with you. Because every day I walk up to somebody that would know, or a couple people that would know on the practice field, and they just look at me and they just kind of shrug, And so I think that what's going to happen here is it's going to be a matter of, does Zack want to miss game checks? Is he that dug in to miss game checks? But I will say this, Scott, my biggest fear is something happens to Tyron Smith.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden Tyler Smith has to go play left tackle. And now you've got two spots that you're dealing with. You're dealing with the left guard and the right guard. And I'm going to say this, I think Matt Forniak has done a decent job. I think, for us to sit there and act like that everything's okay with Zack being out and we'll find a way to get it done and da-da-da-da-da, I think that's kind of fool's gold, to be honest with you. But, he is the number one candidate for that right guard spot if something doesn't materialize with Zack Martin.
He struggled last year, B. He struggled.
Yeah, and that's the situation you're in, because Zack Martin and Terrence Steele work very well together. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to tell you this, man. I'm sorry, Josh Ball. I don't see it right now. And I was talking with Daniel Jeremiah, the NFL Network the other day, and they were here at practice, and we were talking about, and he was saying, well, the right guard, and I go, well, Josh Ball, and he goes, man, I just don't see the power. I never saw the power with Josh Ball to play guard. And, Adoga's had his problems at, a couple of tackle spots. Maybe he's better to guard, but, they've tried TJ Bass. They've tried TJ Bass, and there's been some decent play, but not nearly good enough to where you need to be. I kind of felt like, well, maybe he'll step up, but they are really struggling with that spot. And it's clear, when you watch Dak go back to pass and that right side and say Steele's not in there, but, there's like a Doga and Ball. It doesn't. I mean, Dak is kind of taking the snap, setting up, and then having to move because the rush is on top of him. So this is a game of who will blink first, and just kind of listening to Cowboys talk about it a little bit. They're dug in on this one. They realize that, like, hey, we made you the highest paid offensive lineman or inside interior lineman several years ago. You know, what are you looking for? You know, I'm sure the Cowboys would be looking for, you know, if you want to do an extension, fine, but we're not going to do year to year with you. We're just not, you know. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It doesn't look good. It just doesn't look good when you watch how, you know. And I'm sure the Cowboys are probably sitting there thinking, you know, hell, we won games without Tyron Smith. You know, we won with a rookie left tackle. You know, and
yeah,
I don't know if that's the best way to approach that. I really don't.
You know what I was thinking about, Brian? When it comes to thinking of both sides, I think there's an argument to both sides, right? But for Zach, this was honestly the perfect year for Zach to do this, because Connor McGovern is no longer on this team. And Connor McGovern for a few years was kind of that swing interior guy. And if you remember week 1 of 2021, was it, when Zack Martin was out? He held his own. Yeah. The offense, you know, moved along well. He wasn't Zack Martin, but he held his own. Now, when Zack Martin goes to that negotiation room, there is no Connor McGovern. There's Josh Ball. So it's really, it can get ugly if he really does decide to sit this thing out.
Well, you know, and that's the thing. I don't think he's going to retire, because there was some talk about that, because then he'd have to get back money, and I don't think he particularly wants to do that. You know, it's you know, he's probably sitting at home and he's reading the reports, or he's listening to your podcast, or, you know, he's doing something where people are talking about, you know, hey, it's not pretty. This is just not pretty. If you're out here watching practice, you're seeing some of the issues at right guard. And again, my biggest fear is if something happens, then they have to move to left guard, you know? And so I just, you know, there was a side of me, Sky, that I believed that they were going to, you know, find a way to meet him halfway, you know, find a way,
compromise,
$2-3 million. Yeah, $2-3 million halfway. And, you know, I've said it on a couple different platforms, Love of the Star, 105.3 The Fan, Cowboys Break. I've said it, and I'm saying it now on your platform. I don't know. I don't believe that's true now. I don't believe that's true. I thought that they would find a way. Again, I could be dead balls wrong, you know, about this, but I just don't. Just talking to people, it just doesn't feel like that they're really interested in doing anything. They're like, hey, we'll play, you know, and we have to toe the line here. And as hard as it is to not have your all-pro Hall of Fame, and I think Jerry has to be really careful, Sky. I mean, the other day, you know, listen, I was standing there at Indianapolis at the Combine when Stephen Jones, you know, was sitting there talking about Todd Gurley money when he was, you know, mentioning Ezekiel Elliott. We were asking him questions about Ezekiel Elliott's contract. And Stephen Jones goes, I think it starts with Todd Gurley, doesn't it? And we all kind of looked at each other and like, maybe, maybe not. That's a lot of money, you know? And so that's kind of where, you know, I think the Joneses learned their lesson. Jerry can't come out and say, oh, hey, you know, Zack Martin, our Hall of Fame, all-pro guard, you know, yeah, we miss him. Yeah, I don't think Jerry wants to put that out there. I don't. I think they think all that, but I think Jerry and Steven learned a lesson about talking about their players in a way, and then it comes back. They did it with Dak, you know, talking about Dak, and then it comes back on them. I think they've taken the approach now that, like, we're not going to say anything positive or negative. We're going to try and be as neutral as possible and not give these agents or really the fan base anything to sink their teeth in and like, well, listen, you're the one that said he was an all-pro. You're the one that said he was a Hall of Famer. Why aren't you paying the guy? What's the problem here?
Essentially,
so I think they learned their lesson from that. Yeah.
They're being tactical in the media. And that's kind of where
they're trying. But I think they're also, Sky, real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but I think he's being tactical, but I think he's also being truthful that, you know what, hey, this is is, he said, hey, I'm not going to talk about the Zack Martin situation. But the last several times we've heard Jerry talk, he's brought up stuff about Zack Martin. Yeah. But everybody's watching practice. Everybody's watching practice. Everybody's eyes are focused on what's going on on the right guard spot. As much as you're watching Mozzie Smith play 1 technique or 3 technique, you're watching what's going on at right guard.
We've got Bryan Broaddus, former Cowboy scout, current host, 105 Through the Fan, G-Bag Nation, joining us today with some fantastic stuff. Bryan, a couple years ago, actually it was a while ago, it might have been almost a decade ago. Do you remember the Proud Bryan meme that was going viral?
Yeah, that was the
Rams.
That was the game. It was the Rams game, and I remember because I was waiting for that kid to make a play.
Playboy.
I was just I was just ready for my man to make a play, and he was my LSU guy, love him, and so when he made a play that game, my thought in my head, and I just, he's walking by, and that's where I got that look, and I said, in my mind, I went, it's about damn time. It's what I, in my mind, when he walked by me, I said, it's about damn time. And I thought it. I didn't say it.
Oh, but your face says it all, B. It says it all.
My face said, I was so happy for him. I was happy for him because, he had just taken such a beating, in the media, his health and all that stuff. And, I was super happy for him.
I bring that up because I want to know who would be worthy of Proud Bryan right now down at training camp since you've been down there taking a note.
That's a really good question. And when I say that, you have to kind of think about what you're going to say. I will say Proud Bryan moment. To me, I just, I'm watching, because I was thinking about these cornerbacks and what because
the Eric
Nahshon Wright, I know
Nahshon Wright,
the Nahshon Wright's, Nahshon Wright's taken a lot of people they're attacking Nahshon Wright because Gilmore on the other side has been so good, but I have to say that the way that he's been able to compete. I will say this I'll give you one that, just kind of going through the roster a little bit here too. I'll Proud Bryan on Damone Cook,
hey.
Damone
Clark,
and so Clark,
yes.
Clark
like
and Damone Clark, and I, again, there's another LSU guy. Maybe my Proud Bryan moments are all reserved for LSU players, but with Clark, they're starting. And I answered a Twitter question this morning about Cox, and I said, they were asking me about nickel stuff, and I was talking about Overshown, but then Clark's name came in my mind because they're starting to use Leighton Vander Esch as a rusher. They're starting to put Leighton Vander Esch, like Leighton Vander Esch is now working with, doing drills with like the edge guys, like him, Micah, those guys are down there doing edge work. So, that tells me that Overshown, Clark, those guys are going to get more opportunity to be like true linebackers. And I was kind of with Clark, I was thinking, last year when he was playing, when Vander Esch was out, Clark wasn't the same player. He just didn't look the same. I mean, Vander Esch really, really helped him. Anthony Barr didn't help him.
Yeah.
Anthony Barr was having his own struggles that he was dealing with. And it didn't help Clark, paired with him. But when you put him with Vander Esch, it's a different look. But now they're kind of taking, like I said, they're taking Vander Esch and they're putting him in other roles. But Clark is still in that role he's in. So that tells me that they're having confidence in him and Overshown and those guys, that these young linebackers can function without Vander Esch being there. If we go use Vander Esch for another spot, then we could play these young linebackers and we'll still be okay. So, those are the guys I'm kind of looking at. Like I said, I mentioned Nahshon Wright, and I know that people are going to say, "Damn, Brian, he's getting picked on." There's plays that he's making that you don't see.
Yeah.
And, there's some stuff he's giving up. But, man, that poor kid, there was so much questions about him and Kelvin Joseph and, going into these guys' busts. I think you have to, if you're watching practice, all of Nahshon Wright's plays haven't been bad. Not all of them been bad. There's been some coverage things he's been really good at, knocking the ball away. And, I've been pretty pleased with what he's done. But like I said, he's in for a battle right now.
Yes.
It's good to have Diggs back though, because Diggs is so damn competitive, and you get Diggs, and I'll tell you, I think Bland's had some okay days. I don't think Bland's been as good as he was last year. And I'm not trying to sound the alarm bell or anything like that, but there's been some plays that Bland has given up, and as the nickel is playing that slot, the receivers have done a good job of finding space on him. So, Diggs, Bland, Gilmore, those guys, they've got a good group right there.
It just feels like the competition between the defensive backs and wide receivers this year are night and day. Obviously last year it was CeeDee Lamb and you had a bunch of young guys because, Washington was out,
right.
Gallup was out in camp. But this year when you add a Brandon Cooks, CeeDee Lamb is morphing into his own. He's a top 10 wide receiver right now. And then Michael Gallup coming back from the ACL in his second year, so he'll be better as well. Now they're including guys like Turpin in the offense. I think you're going to see some of these guys lose some of these battles, but when you talk about Nahshon Wright competing, I think that's a positive thing. And the fact that he's winning some of these battles is also positive.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, the receiving group as a whole, it's been really, you kind of like you're working the draft show and it comes down to the final pick for the Cowboys and they pick this kid, they pick Jalen Brooks, in the seventh round, and then you're going, okay. And then you start to kind of do some work on Jalen Brooks and you're like, oh wait, special teams guy. Okay. Check, you're watching him like run routes in South Carolina. Oh, a lot of crossing stuff, big body guy. You see him. Every Cowboys camp I've ever been involved with, there's been those Lance Lenores and the people like that, and hell, even last year, it was like the Dennis Houston thing, and so you're always going to get these camp wide receivers that kind of come from nowhere, but they've got guys. It's not just one or two guys like you mentioned making plays. They've got the whole thing with Turpin making plays too. Yeah. And I'll tell you this about Turpin. I tell you why I think Turpin has done better now. Turpin played a lot of football last year. He went through that whole USFL season and then came to camp, and I don't know how much they really, really wanted to use him. I don't know how much he really knew what was going on. They're not going to put these guys out there if they don't understand. That's why I think Dennis Houston made the team last year. It's because he knew where he needed to go. He was opposite of what Tolbert was. Tolbert lost complete confidence, lost complete understanding of how he needed to play. It just became he drowned. When Dennis Houston, guys like that, they know what they're doing, so they're going to go out there and play these guys. But I think Turpin's body, for as little as he is, he's now to the point where he finally had an off season where he could rest. He played a ton of games last year, and I don't know if they necessarily wanted to use him for any of these offensive plays, but he's found his way on the field. He's been very productive. Him, Brooks, these kids are all making, receptions, in these practices against some quality defensive backs.
And I can't help but think a lot of it is to do with the scheme change a bit, man. And you heard McCarthy talk about in the offseason saying, I just want to make things easier for them so they can play faster and more confidently. And we heard Tolbert talk about it. We heard Simi, Gallup, Lamb. Everyone's talking about it, but they're not just talking, Brian. They're walking. And last year, or you tell me, it feels like the last number of years, this defense has always been ahead of the offense for quite some time. But right away, first few padded practices, the offense is battling these boys and winning some of them.
Yeah, they are. But we have to also be careful that there's been some times where we mentioned earlier in our conversation where that right side of that offensive line has looked really bad. Yeah, and then heck, Tyron Smith got tossed. We all saw those clips. Saw them with our own eyes. So there's been some times where I think there were probably some sacks that went off as completions. So gotcha. I think to your point, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I'm just saying though, there was a couple of times where that ball probably should have been a sack, and here we are. That kind of thing. But for the most part, the offense has it. Yesterday in the red zone they couldn't have had a better day throwing the ball in the red zone, and they couldn't have had a better day on the 2-point plays that they ran. The defense was absolutely had no chance yesterday, and that was their one defense out there trying to stop the offense, and it just didn't work out very well. So to your point, there are some very positive things we've seen offensively. I think a lot of it starts with the quarterback. Quarterback's throwing the ball well. I mean, again, that one pass that Hooker, I don't know why he threw that ball there, but he did. But for the most part, this guy's been accurate. He's hit guys on the move, and he looks like that a lot of the work that they did in the backyard with these guys is paying off for him. That Cooks has been a great addition. Cooks never stops running, and he's just always moving, always finding ways to get open. He looks like he could be a special player for this team. Michael Gallup said best yesterday. He goes, I don't understand why he's been on so many teams, but for us, he goes, I'm glad he's here with us.
Yeah,
because he brings that kind of game.
So we mentioned a lot of players today, and this question, you might end up using one of the players we already talked about, but this comes from Professor O. My guy, Professor O, says, I'd like to know which player you have your eye on that hasn't started to get buzz yet, but is quietly putting together a nice training camp. So maybe someone that's not really in the media a whole lot or getting a lot of highlights, but quietly behind the scenes here, they're putting together a steady training camp, B.
Yeah, I mean, I was going through – it's funny. People have not talked nearly enough about Osa Odighizuwa. I don't think they have. I think he's ready. I think Osa's ready to really break out as that under tackle, that 3 technique. I mean, he is super, super disruptive in the way that he plays. And he is a problem when he lines up over those guards. And he's one of those guys when it's the 9-on-7 period, whether the defense is kind of having a rough day, he's the one guy showing up. Him, Chauncey Golston have shown like they've been that run period in the pads, that those guys have shown up. I was watching him in the pass rush stuff. He was able to win some on the edge as well, doing that. I think that Osa's a guy that not a lot of people are kind of talking about right now, but he's going in the direction that you're really kind of like, okay, hey, this guy's done a pretty damn good job. I'll give you another guy too. Wanye Thomas, the safety from Georgia Tech, has had he's a guy that not many people have talked about, but you watch number 30 and in the drills and then around the ball, he's a guy that's very, very vocal. He's kind of a guy that, when they have problems, they come off the field, you always see him kind of coaching guys up. So he appears the communication skills and stuff are really, really good that way. But I've been impressed with him and watching him play at safety because they've had those injuries and they've had to try and figure some things out. And he seems like that he's one of those guys we'll see in the preseason games. He'll probably get a lot of run in these 3 preseason games. And maybe he'll show up on special teams as well. But guy is always around the ball, and he's always a guy communicating. But I really liked him, and then I like what I saw with Osa. I will say this too for your listeners as well. Quentin Bohanna showed up yesterday, Big Bo, and that's the first time. Yeah, that's the first time that that I could say that. It's a really important year, I think, for Quentin. I think for these under tackles, now that you got Mozzie, or excuse me, the nose tackles. Now that you got Mozzie, now you got Hankins. Quentin Bohanna, is he a guy that will be in the mix? But yesterday in practice, he actually showed up pretty well. So. Good for him for doing that.
Yeah, the defensive line, the interior wise, I think is night and day to start training camp from last year, where Bohanna
Yeah.
was really kind of your leading guy as a one tech, and Tristan Hill was fighting, to get on the team. Neville Gallimore couldn't breathe in Denver. His asthma or something was getting the best of him. This year, guys like Neville Gallimore are going to have to really impress to keep these other young guys off their heels. So I love the interior depth.
Well, they've got some good depth. You're absolutely right about that. And, the one thing is, you were talking about the Tristan Hills and people like that. There always seemed like he was always on the ground. He was always on the ground. These the front seven that the Cowboys currently have, and those guys practice, they're not on the ground. They're guys playing on their feet. They're guys going to the ball. It's been a lot different from what we've seen in the past.
Man, Bryan Broaddus, 105 through the fan, absolutely giving us fantastic analysis down there. Last thing before I get you going here, because I didn't even realize we're about 40-some minutes in. This has been awesome, Bryan. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
One thing I've noticed, man, I got to give you your flowers while you're here. I've been watching you for a very, very long time, okay? I mean, probably since I can remember getting on the internet and watching podcasts and whatnot, when you guys were in it looked like a closet down there at Valley Ranch, I think.
Yeah.
You were kind of in the closet there. What I appreciate, man, is that you've had a number of different teammates come through that door during the draft show, and you've taught them how to scout, or you've helped aided them. The Dave Hellmans, the Jeff Kavanaughs, the Nosebleed guys, Aisha. We all are fans of them, but I don't know if people out there know you have a big say in them getting to that respectable level. So I kind of want to give you your flowers and just ask, like, what is it like kind of being a teacher in sense when it comes to scouting for these future scouts or future film analysis creators?
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning all those guys and gals. And, yesterday at practice, I got to watch a practice with Jazz Daigle, and I was, from, her, they do a tremendous job on their podcast and stuff like that, and Jazzy, and it's great. And I would appreciate being on with them. The thing that I've always taken an interest in people that wanted to learn, that learn about whether the draft or football or, I don't have all the answers, but I always try and find the answers. I've learned a lot. I can't tell you how important David Hellman was in my life working at DallasCowboys.com. Every story every story that I ever wrote for DallasCowboys.com for all those years, Dave Hellman edited. He literally rewrote every article that I ever posted on DallasCowboys.com. Wow. And, and I can't, he's doing his job and doing my job. He's got the words, but he's writing it. I can't tell you how important he was in my life, and what he did, the sacrifices he made for me. So I felt obligated to try and help him the best I could, learn about the game. You mentioned Aisha Morrison, Derek Eagleton, when we were kind of talking about the lineup for the draft show, I asked Derek Eagleton, I said, hey, listen, this young lady you got on, Girls Talk, Boys Talk, this Aisha Morrison, I really do like what I hear from her. I think she's got a good eye for this stuff. And he said, what are you thinking about? I said, draft show. And he goes, you want to put her on the draft show? I said, absolutely want to put her on the draft show. I think she'd be great. Well, we got Aisha Morrison involved with our college film chain, and she was able to evaluate. I thought she did a hell of a job on the draft show.
Yes,
we had
did.
like record numbers. We had record numbers. And, the thing that people have got to realize is being the first female ever to be on the draft show extensively, as part of the scouting group, it's great pressure on her, but I knew from her military background, I knew from her ability to be dedicated, to study, to train, that she was going to do just fine. And she looked at players. She had an opinion. She didn't back down. There were people that weren't happy she's there. She put that aside. The people that were happy she was there, she thanked them and moved on. I think she learned so much, and we learned so much from her.
Yeah.
We really did. Jeff Kavanaugh. I don't work with Jeff anymore on the radio side. He's on a rival station, but still great friends with Jeff. Kevin Turner, Dane Brugler. I mean, Dane Brugler. I remember Dane Brugler was. Dane Brugler was one of the original members of the draft show. Dane was just starting out as a guy that was interested in the draft. He was doing it kind of as a side job, and now he's a full-time. He's one of the best media drafters in the country. He's one of the most respected guys, but he got to start there. These people all came into my life for a reason, but they all made me better. It wasn't me always making them better. These guys made me better, with the passion they had for it. And again, I just really appreciate all the guys and gals like yourself that do this and bring content. I mean, we all see this differently. We all don't always see the same thing. We all don't get along all the time, but we do try and do the best we can with what we have. And the effort that these guys and gals make to bring content is worth my help any way I can. That's just how I look at it.
That is awesome to hear, and I'm very appreciative to hear that and humbled coming from the great Bryan Broaddus. My guy Oscar said if there was a media ring of honor, you should be in it, and I 100% agree with that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And like I said, it's there's these guys and gals that I work with are just tremendous people. Number one, but the passion that they bring, to the sites and the podcast and the writing and all that stuff. We can all learn. I mean, I learn. I'm not sitting there. I mean, I am so grateful to have interaction with the Aisha Morrisons and the David Hellmans and the Jeff Kavanaughs and the Kevin Turners and the Dane Bruglers and all these people, the Zach Wolchuk, Kyle Yeomans, all these guys and gals that I've worked with have been just outstanding. They really have.
Well, I'll tell you this. I hope we don't have to hear that draft theme music until February 21st or something crazy, Bryan, because that would mean the Cowboys are doing fantastic things in the playoffs, B. So here's to a great season, and here's to not hearing that theme music for a long, long time. All right?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Sky. I do have to start working on the draft on December 1st just to make sure I get all my names in. But yeah, I'm with you. If the draft show can go a little later this year, that would be awesome. It really would be. Man.
Once again, Bryan Broaddus, 105 through the fan, former Cowboy scout, joining us. Thank you so much, Bryan. I'm going to let you go. I know you got to get ready to head down to practice and give us, well, actually, there's no practice today, but get some rest. Go have some fun with the guys, rest up, and then tomorrow you'll get back out there.
Sounds great, Sky. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for all your listeners that hang out with us. If I could throw a plug out there for
Absolutely.
Love of the Star. If you haven't checked out Bobby and I's Love of the Star, we'd love to have you. You can find it on all the Odyssey podcast. I think all those platforms, we're on all those things. So, yeah, Bobby and I do it twice a week. When the season starts, we'll go 3 times a week on Love of the Star. So hopefully some good content. After you get done listening to your show, you can listen to a little Love of the Star. How about that?
If you're not listening to that, you are missing out. There are so many quality nuggets there. So Love of the Star, Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the app. You're missing out, guys. You got to definitely download that.
Thanks, Guy. Appreciate you, man. Take care of yourself.
You as well. Thank you again, B.